My name is Gina Shostak. I am a woman. I have depression. I am an alcoholic and an addict in recovery, and I am in recovery for an eating disorder. I am also an adult probation officer here in Lake County. Every day, I get to try my best at helping people. First off, I want to thank all of you young women for being here today, and I want to thank you for saving my life. Before you get too creeped out, I will elaborate. If it weren't for people like you, I wouldn't be alive today. I would have given up years ago. I would have stopped fighting. But I knew there were other people like me, people who needed guidance, needed the hope of someone who fought hard and made it out alive. That is why I am here today. I'm going to tell you about my story, and I hope some of it resonates with you, and I hope you can relate to some of the things I have gone through. But I hope that this helps give you hope that a better day is always on the horizon. I understand that each of you have your own stories, you have your own struggles, and I would never think for a second that I could put myself in your shoes. Your stories are unique. What each of you are going through right now in your life is unique. It's yours. If you ever feel like you have nothing in this world, if somebody ever tells you that you have nothing in this world, always remember that you have your story. You own that. Before I get into anything, I want to ask something of all of you. If you could get a pen and paper and write down all of the things that seem difficult about your life, things that make you cry, things that you wish hadn't happened in the past, things you wish weren't happening right now. Those things can be people you wish were different, people you wish treated you better, people you wish treated themselves better in front of you, maybe a parent. Anything that you feel has wronged you, write it down. These things might not come out all onto your paper right away, and that's okay. While I speak, if something triggers you, write it down. If something I say upsets you for whatever reason, write it down. We'll circle back to your list later, but I promise you, there's a reason I'm asking you to do this. Now you get to listen to me talk for a little while. I'll try to make it painless and interesting. For as far back as I can remember, I felt different. I was a middle child, and typically, middle children are known as being the different ones. So I think a lot of people just chalked it up to that, but I couldn't. I knew it went deeper than just my being a middle child. I came from a family who seemed to have it all together. They were all able to fall in line, and they were successful with what seemed like very little effort. They just seemed to get life. And I did really well at barely making it by every day. That's at least how it felt to me. I got into a lot of trouble at school. I was too loud, I was too talkative, and I had a very hard time sitting still and focusing. I was always too rambunctious, and my Catholic school teachers really didn't appreciate that. What I remember was being very emotionally sensitive. If one of the kids in class felt sad and they cried, I noticed I would have to hold back from crying with them. If one of the kids got picked on, I got very defensive for them, and I would get myself in trouble in order to protect their feelings the best way that I knew how. I always remember being so emotionally in tune with others that it left no space or time in my mind for my studies or for my own life at all. That got overwhelming and it got exhausting. And I remember wishing I could be mean, and I remember wishing I could be selfish, but as hard as I tried, I just couldn't. I remember wishing that my brain would slow down so that I wasn't feeling my thoughts all at the same time as I was feeling everyone else's thoughts, and my mind just felt like a whirlwind of emotions because I took on other people's as well. I read a lot of books. I was sort of a nerd, and I really liked learning and reading. I just didn't like what they had to teach me in school. So I did very poorly, and I got very bad grades. The teachers suggested that my parents get me tested to see if I was just dumb or if I just didn't care enough to try hard in school. I'll tell you this, it ended up being neither of those things. I was diagnosed with ADHD at 10 years old. Maybe some of you can relate to this, but I had the mental capacity to learn, but my brain moved so fast and bounced around so much that I couldn't regurgitate any of the information in the way the schools wanted me to. Tests were hard for me. Homework was hard for me. It was just hard for me to focus. I should also mention that although nobody caught it, I felt depressed for the first time when I was 10 as well. The doctor put me on medicine for my ADHD. It was supposed to slow my brain down and help me focus on one task at a time instead of having 30 thoughts in 1 second. It did slow my brain down, so much so that I felt like a zombie. This might be another thing that some of you can relate to. I remember my hands would feel sweaty, and I didn't really want to talk to people or socialize at all in school. And when I got home, I couldn't sleep. I remember very vividly hating how the medicine made me feel. So one morning, my mother went to give me my medicine, and I grabbed the bottle and I threw it out the front door. And I got grounded because if I didn't take my medicine, I wouldn't do well in school. And the teachers would be angry, and my parents would get calls. So in order for me to be likable by the teachers, and in order for me to be successful in the way that I needed to be, I had to be medicated. I had to be fixed. There was a problem and something was needed to turn that around for me. I think that the teachers liked me quiet, and I was easier to manage. I told my parents that I didn't like it, but I still took it. And that made me sad because I was bothered by the fact that I bothered people. That really was the first time in my life that I felt like who I was bothered people. And that really took a huge hit, I think, on the way that I viewed myself into adulthood. I needed fixed. I should mention this. No matter what anybody tells you, nothing about who you are needs to be fixed. Nothing about what you choose to do with yourself or your life needs to be fixed. We all have things that we need to work on. Till this day, I still have trouble with the volume of my voice, and I still get told almost daily that I am too loud. Ironically, I learned much later in my life that I am hard of hearing, which is why I'm so loud, because the volume that sounds so loud to others actually sounds normal to me. It doesn't change the fact that my voice still bothers some people. And it doesn't change the fact that I don't really have to care about that. I would be lying to you if I said that it doesn't sometimes get to me or like get on my nerves when people tell me to be quiet. I don't like being told that I'm too loud, but it's something that I have to accept as unique to me, and something that I have to accept as just a unique part of me. As I got into my teens, the feelings of being broken stuck with me. They were there, and nobody could undo those feelings. I got counseling. I continued being force-fed that medication, and things just got worse. When I was about 14, the depression I had felt for the first time when I was 10 started to get worse, a lot worse. But something I didn't pay attention to was when I was feeling depressed. I thought that it was feeling different, that it was maybe boys, that it was maybe meeting girls, that it was school. But it was actually my own female body making me cripplingly depressed for a few days once a month. At 16 years old, I was diagnosed with Pmdd. Pmdd is like PMS, but on crack. It is called Pre-Menstrual Dysphoric Disorder. It basically puts you into such a deep depression that it can be life-threatening because you're not thinking right. You're hopeless, you're depressed. I couldn't get out of bed for a full day. I couldn't stop crying. And then my period started and everything was fine. So when I felt suicidal and felt like the world was ending, it would only last maybe 24 hours and then it would feel okay again. And that was confusing because as a 16-year-old girl, you don't really know enough about the way your body works yet to understand that your feelings are not actually logical and they're not what you're actually feeling. Again, I felt abnormal. Like, why couldn't I be like everyone else? Why was I born like this? Around the same time, I found alcohol. I found something that made me feel normal, like everyone else. I found something that made me feel the happiest I had ever felt. And when I drank, I couldn't stop. I drank and drank and drank because I didn't want to stop. I worried that if I did stop, the feelings of sadness would be there waiting for me again. And they were. They were always there waiting. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time when I was 17 years old because NYCASA told my parents I should. NYCASA is a treatment center here in Lake County. It's a great treatment center. And I went to NYCASA because my high school told my parents that if I didn't go, I would get kicked out. So I went. Alcoholics Anonymous is the first time where I found a bunch of people who were just like me. They felt like outcasts, they felt broken, and they fell prey to an addiction to something that made them feel more normal. Most of them, like me, were related to other people who were alcoholics. I knew from the very first time I drank that I was an alcoholic because of the way it made me feel. I knew I was like my uncle. I knew that I was going to have a long struggle with it because it made me feel better than it seemed to make other people feel. Although I was able to accept that I was an alcoholic almost right away, it didn't mean that I wanted to accept that I couldn't drink like everyone else. I still had this longing to feel normal. And even though I knew I wasn't going to give up trying. Not yet, at least. I couldn't seem to stay away from the stuff. I continued to get into trouble. I continued to get brought to the hospital for alcohol poisoning. I continued to embarrass my otherwise perfect family. My parents ended up locking up all the alcohol in the house, but I still got it from my friends and from liquor stores that didn't card me. I realized that I wasn't going to get any better without accepting help. And after I graduated high school, the day after I graduated high school, and by graduate, I mean they let me graduate because they were sick of seeing me. I barely had a D average. It was a D minus. I probably shouldn't have graduated, but luckily I did. And I was flown to the state of Oregon the next day for a wilderness rehab program. I hiked an average of 9 miles a day with one shirt, one pair of pants, and a big hiking backpack on my back for 2.5 months. We didn't have tents. We slept under a tarp that we attached to a stick. I was there with other kids my age. I was then transitioned to another treatment program in Bend, Oregon, the state of Oregon, for an entire year. I learned about my addictions. I learned about shame that comes with addictions. And I learned about the shame I had from feeling different all my life. I learned about my emotions. And I learned that when you go without anything to distract yourself from your emotions, you have to face them. And ignoring them is pretty foolish because they will win every time. They rule everything you do. And unless you work really, really hard at facing them and learning how to live with them, they get in the way sometimes and not in the way that you want them to. After I finished treatment, I decided I wanted to be a hairstylist, and I moved to Ohio and I got my cosmetology degree. After a year in Ohio, I moved to San Diego, California, because my goal was that I wanted to work for one of the best salons in the country. So I found that salon. I drove out there, I interviewed, flew back, and I packed up all my stuff in a U-Haul and moved the next month. I was doing something that I was good at, and I was not really worrying about drinking at all because I was too involved in what I was doing and what I loved. I did not drink the entire time I was in beauty school, and when I moved out to California, I remained sober. That is until I got a call about my father. My father was diagnosed with brain cancer, and the doctor said it would eventually kill him. My father did not want me to come home because he was so proud of what I was accomplishing, and he knew that I would be very successful if I stayed. He told me that everything would be okay, and I should stay there and continue to work. After about a year, his cancer was so bad that I made the decision I was going to move home and spend the last couple of months of his life taking care of him. So I did. I picked up everything and moved home. And I will say this right now, that was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through. Not moving home, but seeing my father like that. He was my best friend. He was the one who always tried and seemed to understand me and make me feel understood. He understood me, but he never failed to tell me that he was proud of me, that I was beautiful, and that I was strong. He was my support system, my only support system. My father understood my alcoholism and supported me so much in that when I quit drinking, he quit drinking because he wasn't going to let me do that by myself, he said. My father was not an alcoholic, but he supported me in a way that he wanted to fight my fight with me. He stood by me. My 22nd birthday was on July 15th. My father passed away at 12:12 in the morning on July 16th. I have always thought that maybe he waited until after my birthday was done. I handled my father's death the best I could, but it wasn't great. Okay, so it was worse than great. It was pretty bad. I handled it very poorly. I lost my sobriety. I started partying a lot, and I also developed an eating disorder. I felt really out of control of what happened to him, so my response was needing to feel some kind of control over something in my life. And so that became my body. I stopped eating, and I took my pain out on my body. I slowly got thinner and thinner, and I wasn't allowing myself to eat pretty much anything, and then I would run 6 miles a day. The eating disorder got so bad that I was forced into a treatment program where they force-fed me. And that was difficult, but it also didn't work. It continued to get worse, and I ended up at about 80 pounds. I was killing myself, but I was okay with it because my logic was maybe if I died, I would get to be with my father again. My brain was starving, and I was sort of losing my sense of reality. That happens when your brain is starving. You're spiraling out of control, and your brain tries to adjust to understand what reality is. And in a sense, it protects you. I moved back to California with drugs and alcohol still ruling my life and no food and no will to live. But I moved back to California because I wanted to get away from everybody that was trying to help me. In my mind, they were trying to control me. They were trying to tell me what to do, and they were trying to make me feel stupid, like I couldn't take care of myself. So I left. It made me angry that people were trying to help me. Why? Because I truly believed that nothing was wrong with me at the time. I think in hindsight, I just didn't want to believe that anything was wrong with me at the time. I looked sick, and everyone who had eyes knew that something was wrong. But they were wrong. That's what I thought. I thought they wanted me to be fat and that they wanted to take everything that I had done to cope away from me. Every bone in my body was sticking out, and I was fat. I looked in the mirror, and I was wearing children's clothing because that's all that fit me, and somehow I was fat. That's what my brain told me. If I didn't end up running 6 miles a day one day, I feared that I was going to be obese, like those people you see on reality shows. It sounded normal to me at the time, but it's not, in case you needed me to tell you that. I stopped being around friends because they wanted me to go out to eat. I stopped dating because I didn't want anyone to touch me anywhere. I didn't talk to my mother because she would inevitably ask me if I was eating that day. And every time we spoke, she asked me if I was eating. So I stopped talking to her. I cut myself off from everyone and everything except running, working, and counting every calorie that went into my mouth. It was miserable. I was very, very lonely, and I felt trapped by my addiction to control. And I felt, again, like I had no control over all of my addictions. My mind had officially taken over any sense of reality that I had. And here's a really cool piece of information. Studies have shown that prolonged periods of starvation actually change the way that your mind perceives reality. When your brain starves, you develop that warped sense of reality, like I mentioned before. And everything that is going on around you is presented to you in a different way. They actually did studies with war veterans where they were asked to starve themselves for periods of time, and then they would put a mirror in front of them. And the men actually had a completely different view of what their body looked like than normal. So what that showed is that even these men who never had any body issues or anything before would starve, and then when they would look at a mirror after a long period of starvation, they thought they were fat. Everything in their brain changed what they were seeing. It took me about 4 years to get to a place where I didn't have to run every day, count every calorie I ate. Does that mean I'm cured? No. It will always be there. My body is stable, but I am not sick. But sometimes I still hear my eating disorder talking to me in the back of my head. Don't eat this, don't eat that. Every so often, it gets louder in my mind. And when I take a step back and think about it, I realize it's when I'm going through a stressful situation in my life. Through a stressful time where I feel like I don't have enough control, all of a sudden my eating disorder starts to get louder. And now that I'm aware of that, it's really easy for me to check it and call myself on what's happening. But again, if you don't pay attention to your emotions and things that are going on, you can't possibly call yourself out when these things are starting to take control. During that time in my life, I decided I wanted to go back to school. I was doing hair and I felt like I still needed more knowledge. I started reading school textbooks that I bought off the internet and trying to teach myself everything there was to know about psychology and therapy. I wanted to help people. As I stated before, I had barely graduated high school. And I mean barely. So college was sort of a scary thought. I mean, I knew I could write. I knew I could write well. That was really the only thing I felt confident in. And talk, obviously. But I didn't know if my ADHD had maybe gotten worse, or who knew, maybe it had gotten better. I thought that maybe because I cared so much more about this and I had personal motivation to want to learn, that things would be easier for me. Well, I graduated at the top of my class and was chosen as a commencement speaker for my 2018 graduating class ceremony. I graduated with a psychology major and double minored in women's and gender studies and history, all things that I was really passionate about. I graduated high school with a D- average and graduated college with a 4.0 GPA. Now that I am sober, I have my eating disorder under control and am empowered by my passions. Here are some of the things that I have learned that I want to share with you. 1, if you focus all your energy on your passions, you have no space in your head for your demons. By that, I mean, for example, my eating disorder fell under control towards the end of my college education because I was so hyper-focused on being the best student that I could be and learning as much as I could that I had no time to focus or obsess over my eating. There wasn't enough time in the day. You want to find what you love and immerse yourself into it, whatever it is, whether it's drawing, makeup, music, swimming, soccer, anything that you love to do. You want to put all of your energy towards that, especially when you're going through a stressful time in your life, because you know that's not going to betray you. Something you're passionate about is never going to have a negative effect on you. Just make sure you give it all your energy, because that's where you deserve to put it. Number 2, allowing people to help me was difficult, but more rewarding than I ever knew. I was always so opposed to allowing people to help me because I felt like it meant I was stupid and I couldn't do it on my own. But that's not what it meant. It meant that people cared about me and they wanted to see me do well and they wanted to see me healthy. And I think another huge part of allowing people to help you is asking questions. Ask a million questions. I'm sure my boss would tell you that he is so sick of me asking questions because that's all I do. But it's a great way to learn things, and it's a great way to understand that there is so much more in this world that you don't even have in your peripheral yet. Like, there are so many things that are going to come at you. And the more you learn, the more you're going to understand that where you're at now is not the most significant part of your life. There's so much more. Number 3, nobody can make you love yourself. Nobody and nothing can convince you that you are worthy or that you are beautiful. That is an inside job. I wish I had the answer to this one for you. I wish I had the magic pill to self-love. And I promise you, you'll hear about it when I invent it because I'll be a billionaire. But until then, I'm going to give you this piece of advice. It is a daily practice. I still have days where I look at myself in the mirror and I cry because it's impossible for anybody to believe every second of every day that they are beautiful. I have a fiance who tells me probably 5 times a day that he thinks I'm the most beautiful woman in the world. Do you want to know how often I believe him? Maybe 50% of the time. Not because I think he's a liar, but because I'm aware that what he thinks doesn't change the way I feel about myself. And what you have to understand is that no matter what you seek outside of yourself to make you feel better, the only person who's going to make you feel better is you. And unless you give yourself that space and that energy to do it for yourself, none of it's going to work. The last thing I learned, and while I'm telling you this one, I want you to take a look at those lists that you made. The one with the list of all the stuff you don't like about yourself or your life, the things that you wish were easier. And I promise you, in 10 years from now, each one of those will be something that someone else really loves about you. Something that taught you a lesson that you needed to learn is another one. So one of those things that is on your list might be really difficult and really hard right now, but when you're older, when you're 30 and an old lady like me, you can look back and say, hey, that really taught me something. I learned a lot. And now when I come across somebody who is going through the same thing, I can relate to them. It will make you more compassionate with others. Something on that list will make you more compassionate. You'll be able to connect with people in a different way because you've actually gone through their same experiences. And that's a gift. Something on that list has also probably helped you cut out certain behaviors that you need to learn to leave behind. So if you haven't cut out some of those behaviors yet, maybe you will. But a lot of these painful experiences that you're going through are going to help you learn what you need to change in order to grow. And finally, those things on that list will make you into who you are going to be in your future. And they make you into who you are right now. You will be grown women someday with experiences, with trials and tribulations, and you'll have wisdom and you'll have strength. But the most beautiful part about that is you are going to be so uniquely you because your story, that list, is going to make you into the woman that you're going to be someday. And that is all I have to say. I am going to answer some questions, and I am sure that there are a lot of questions that some of you girls have out there that you cannot ask me because we are together through a screen right now. So there are going to be some questions that maybe some of you would have wanted to ask, or if you don't get to ask them, you can always ask somebody and they will give you my email address and you can ask me any questions that you want to ask me at any time. And I will always be here to answer them.
I got a question. If someone is going through what they see as an addiction or maybe even a potential addiction, and they say maybe they're embarrassed by it, they don't even want to bring it up, but they do want to face it, what would be your recommendation of maybe dealing with that or confronting it?
So my recommendation with dealing with it or confronting it would be, I think the first step would be do research, right? So I think that at the beginning of everybody's acceptance, there are questions. And well, like a guy who's an alcoholic has a brown paper bag and he stands on the corner of a highway asking for money, right? Like that's not me. So maybe I'm actually not. So do research. That would be my biggest piece of advice. Look at different stories, look at different web pages, look at different things like that so that you can kind of clear any doubt in your mind. Because your best success is going to be when you fully accept what's going on. And then I think the next step would be to go to an adult. In this situation, go to an adult who has the ability to help you. There are a lot of resources. The Lake County Health Department is a great one because they can find any place for you to get the help you need.
So you mentioned writing stuff down on the paper, those traits that you see as negative, someone will love someday. Can you give us an example of that in your life?
Sure. So one of the things that I have always disliked about myself is that it's really hard for me to turn my brain off. And I feel like I'm constantly thinking about things and analyzing things and breaking them down. And I think a lot of people in my life, and I would say, for example, some of my best friends really love the fact that we can sit and talk for hours about things that other people might not even think about. And another one is just the fact that I'm as talkative as I am, was always, to me, such a negative aspect of myself. But it's really helped me gain a lot of friends and relationships. The fact that I am able to talk so much and be outgoing has opened the door for me to develop relationships with a lot of people.
How do you keep the perspective that the moments you're going through in your life are not the most impactful moments in your entire life? Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So that's a really good question, because I think there have been a lot of moments in my life, and I know a lot of women and people in general, where you feel like this is the end or like nothing's ever going to get better. But what I learned, and it's a cool trick, is if I'm feeling like everything is over and like the whole world is crashing down on me and my life is just, this is awful and I'm not going to make it through, what I do is I write it down on a piece of paper. I put the date down and I put the time down and I say, I don't feel like I'm going to make it till tomorrow. This is the date and this is the time. The next day, I want you to look at that piece of paper at the exact same time, and 99% of the time, you will feel a little bit better than you did yesterday. So it's almost like a promise to yourself, like, this is a marker. This is how I feel right now, and everything's awful, and I'm spiraling out of control. And 24 hours later, you are guaranteed to have somewhat of a different perspective on what you were feeling the day before. And it's really easy to be impulsive and to feel like nothing's ever going to get better, but it almost always works.
When you're battling through like addictions or some of the just the troubles that you're going through, and you figure out ways how to work with them and confront them and get better from them, and once you're at a spot where you're happy and you feel good, and then you notice yourself maybe slip a little bit, what would you recommend for people where they notice themselves slipping or maybe falling back into that addiction for maybe a small period of time? What is like a recommendation to like reconfront, even though you know some tools that may work, but maybe it's just like, I don't want to do that anymore or something?
Yeah. I would say the first thing to do is to reach out to somebody. Reach out to somebody and tell them what you're noticing. Tell them why it's bothering you that you're noticing those things, where you feel like you're going to go, and ask somebody. And this is just for every situation, but especially with recovery, you always want somebody in your corner who will hold you accountable. Because having people be able to call you out and be like, listen, like, this is what you're telling me, this is what I'm seeing, and something's got to change. Something's got to give. And allowing people to hold you accountable is super, super important. That's why I love AA, because you are encouraged strongly to get a sponsor. And what that is it's somebody who's just more stable in their recovery, and they're able to guide you, and they're able to be a sounding board for like, this is what I'm seeing, this is what you're telling me, and they're able to help you redirect. And a lot of times in situations like that, when you reach out to people, you find that you are almost like smothered with love and support when you just ask for help. I think that's really important, is asking for help and accepting help.
What are you most proud of with yourself and your own story? Just because I have a tough time looking back at myself and being like, oh, look at me, I've done this or this. Like, I have a tough time too. So what's something that you look back on and you need to just think about it and say, I am really proud of myself for this, or I'm really proud of myself that I did that?
I think the thing I'm most proud of is the fact that as a 24-year-old woman, I went back to school and made it through. I think because that was really daunting. And I think what makes me the most proud about it was that what got me through school when I was having a hard time was the fact that I knew I was going to be able to help people. And that makes me the most proud, that every single day in my job that I get to help people, and that I went through school to do just that. Mm-hmm.
How much do you tell people that you meet nowadays about your past? Is it something that you believe is an important part of you and that you like to share? Or is it something that you feel like you've moved past in a lot of ways?
I think it's very important that I share it. But I don't tell, that's a good question, because I don't tell a lot of people the whole story. I think there are little bits and pieces that I choose to share because I think they're going to be more impactful to others. But no, most people don't know what I just read out loud, no. And I think it's my close friends and people I care about. But the eating disorder is one of the things that I feel like I do try to talk the most about publicly, because it is so prevalent and because I don't think it's talked about enough. It's also important for people who are going through an eating disorder to see that it's not going to be the rest of your life. Mm-hmm.
Do you find it, for people going through very difficult situations, do you find it, obviously it's circumstantial for each person, but do you find it easier to talk to strangers, if you will, or really close people? Because I know there's, sometimes it's even harder to talk to the people that know you best, and then versus someone who's like, I can just be open with this person.
Yeah. I definitely find that it's easier to talk to strangers about it. Yeah. It's easier to talk to strangers because they don't know my personality and they can just see me as like this figurehead of some sort, like who's telling this story. And it's like, oh yeah, I've seen that on TV, like I've seen Addiction, I watched Intervention, and I watched Mean Girls, so I know about eating disorders. But it's like, I think there's so many different perspectives that people have on it. So when it's not somebody that you're close with, they don't know your daily ins and outs to understand and kind of pinpoint where they see those things in your life. I'm really happy that you guys were here to listen to me today. My information is going to be on the screen. If you ever need me, I'm always going to be here as a resource or a listening ear for you. And I'm really excited to see what you do with the rest of your lives. You're going to be amazing women.